Well, thank you very much. This is so hard. I'm used to walking out to thunderous applause, so this is just really awkward. Thank you so much. I don't know, it seems a little contrived. Seriously, thank you for being part of this conference. This is the fourth for Our Future conference, and it's the first one we've done virtually. And I want to thank the presenters, the speakers, the panelists for their contributions to making this what I think was really a resounding success. I also want to thank some folks in our office, of course, our provost, Janine Kahn, who just gets things done. And it's amazing to have a partner like that you can have total faith and trust in to do things at a world-class level. To folks on our staff, Caitlyn, Wilkerson, and Jesse Gabor, our communication staff. Jesse is the creative artist that does all of our beautiful publications, and if you saw the Compete Louisiana annual report, that's her work. It's amazing. And if you follow us on social media, either through the system or through Compete Louisiana, that's Caitlyn Wilkerson's pithy little style that sends a great message and helps us communicate with audiences that perhaps we have maybe not have communicated with in the past. They do great work. Of course, Cammie Geisman and Clara Norris and Sandra Green and Erica Calais and Marcus Jones, who, Marcus contributed minimally, but still his presence was there and was noted. So we appreciate that work, and the extraordinarily gifted and talented Ann McKisson. Ann, when we came up with this idea for an annual conference, I said, Ann, why don't you handle this? And she didn't even flinch, and she delivered a great conference. The next two were even better. And this one was an odd request. I said, Ann, I want you to put together a virtual conference and make it the best virtual conference that's ever been offered on the planet Earth. Now, all of them stink, so that really wasn't as high a bar as it might have sounded like rhetorically, but Ann certainly delivered, and I'm very pleased with the turnout. I hope you are as well. And this is important that we have these kind of conversations. As we come through a year that has been marked by pandemic. It was almost a year ago that we first repurposed the whole of our operation to move 92,000 students from the environments that they had subscribed to, put them in an online environment, and it was a Herculean undertaking. Now listen, people that saw this from the outside said, okay, we get it. They're going to start learning from home. Anyone that has been involved in the instructional process of the operations of a college or university understand how monumental that work was. Faculty that had to shift on a dime to put students in a disposition where they can be successful. And I'm proud to say that we graduated more than 16,000 students during this year of unprecedented disruption. It was facilities people that had to transform our facilities, that had to learn things about epidemiology that they never wanted to learn, to try to make sure that we had safe environments. The front-facing staff that had to quickly adjust and become virtual staff, working from home, but trying to maintain the level of service to students. And it cuts across the whole of our enterprise. And, if I get to work in this field for another 20 years, I'll never forget the work of the University of Louisiana system to deliver on behalf of students. But 2020 wasn't just marked by the pandemic. We had 6 named storms hit Louisiana. I know you're trying to say which one was the 6th. Well, it was just a couple of weeks ago with Winter Storm Uri, when we started naming winter storms. I'm not sure, but we had 5 named storms in hurricane season. And when I got a text from Daryl Burkell at 3:16 in the morning, and when I get a text from our presidents at 3:16, I know most of them aren't party animals, so they're not just getting home. They're not usually telling me they passed a new accrediting visit or that they have gotten a new donation. It's usually some bad news. And that was no exception in this case. Daryl was in a building. He says, the eye has just passed over our campus and the roof has been taken off of our building. And so they moved to another building where they had set up shop, where they had put communications in place. They were prepared to weather the storm, but they had no idea what they were going to face the next morning under the light of day. And when the light of day came, Daryl sent me some pictures of the campus, the devastation that had occurred on McNeese's campus and throughout Lake Charles. And as I scrolled through each picture showing a progressively worse state of the city, he ended it with a text. He says, "We're fine, we're going to persevere." And I can think of no sentiment that better captures what's occurring in Lake Charles and how McNeese State has served as an inspiration for an entire region. They're back on that campus. They are teaching students. They have found ways to bring faculty and try to make them whole so that they can continue the work of developing our students, and it is an inspiration to all of us. But it was almost immediately after the storm. Cammie Geisman and I drove to Lake Charles, and we got to see firsthand the destruction. And I was there a week after Hurricane Rita, and would never diminish the impact of Hurricane Rita because it was such a disaster for that region. But it paled in comparison to what we saw after Hurricane Laura. And then 6 weeks after Hurricane Laura, 15 miles to the east, another powerful storm took dead aim. And the temporary roofs were pulled off of the buildings at McNeese, and 14 inches of rain were dumped into those facilities. And a lot of people would have given up, but McNeese didn't. One of the people at McNeese that contributed throughout both storms and all of the time in between and after is someone we're going to honor today. It's our outstanding staff member for the University of Louisiana system, William Schufen. You know, Chief Schufen was in the building with President Burkell when the roof came off. He was there with his police force because it was the safest place to be. And when it was no longer that place, he calmly moved them to the next safest place. And it was his demeanor that President Burkell said really stuck out to him because he never panicked. Now, he had done the work ahead of time in preparing, right? He had positioned communication devices in the right places. They had cots there, had generators there. And for the next week, that became their home. Right? Sleeping in those cots, using those generators to power their devices, even bathing in the rec center pool. If you were wondering why chlorine was on the list of supplies that they needed, well, you have a police force that bathes in the rec center pool for a week, you better use a little chlorine. Chief Schufen's was the model of preparation. He was the model of resilience, and he is certainly worthy of this honor. By the way, that cot that he's been sleeping on, he just recently folded and put it back up and went home to sleep in his bed. This storm hit in August. It's now February. Not all heroes wear capes. Chief Schufen, thank you so much for your work, and thank you for giving us someone to emulate going forward. 2020 gave us a lot to deal with. The pandemic, of course, the storms, and an era of social unrest that we haven't seen in quite some time, fueled by a presidential election season that could never seem to find the bottom. It was tough. It was exhausting. And it was that rhetoric that surrounded so much of our conversation, so much of our discourse, that really was troubling. And it's one of the reasons why we have made it a focus for our system to delve into this idea of cultural competence. One of the reasons that a focus on cultural competence is so relevant today is that we're all connected, right? We're connected across the globe. And one of the mechanisms that allows us to connect is social media, that bastion of intellectual thought and discourse. And here, sometimes we do things that are just frivolous. This is Steve Caparato, weatherman in Baton Rouge, who was talking about a coming winter storm and happened to see it, and man responded immediately, "Hey, will the schools be open Monday?" Probably the first of 1,000 such requests that he got. And that's just fun, humorous fun. Sometimes, though, we get to interact with those that, may not be at the top of the food chain, if you will. I don't know how he got a Twitter verified profile, but I saw this tweet with that great scientific observation that if we were truly supposed to wear masks, we would have evolved masks instead of mouths and nose to breathe. And I don't know if anyone has studied this yet. I do want to party with this guy because somebody that comes up with this ludicrous has got to be a lot of fun when he's imbibing. Sometimes it's a little more serious though, right? And this was a post that was made by a politician certainly with some aspirations, where she talked about from college classrooms to corporate boardrooms to media green rooms, liberal elites, I guess that's us, want to silence anyone who does not toe the far left line. And this struck me so hard, and I crafted a response, and I sent it to the team that I send edgy things to, and this is not particularly edgy, and said, hey, tweet or twon't. Now, the tweets are the things that you see. The twonts are the things that you'll see when I retire, and I write a book with all of the tweets that they told me that I couldn't post. And this one is not necessarily something that shouldn't be said. Rather, it was something that wouldn't further the mission. And this is the very delicate balance that sometimes as leaders we have to hit, because all this would do is stir up partisan bickering around political lines and not actually advance what I think is a very important sentiment. Because we're not liberal elites that want people to toe the line. As educators, we enlighten people and we expand the discourse and we create the thinkers and learners that are going to shape us, that prepare them to work in this culturally connected world. See, this is a portion of that cultural competence that we talk about. And listen, Nikki Haley understands this. She's an educated person. We had another educated politician who engaged in some conduct that was not becoming. His book contract was pulled from him, and this guy who went to Harvard and Yale, but he's an everyman, posted that the pulling of his book contract from a private company was an assault on the First Amendment. Now, I thought Harvard and Yale prepared lawyers better than that, but we all know that's nonsense, and he knew it was nonsense. But here's the problem, and it's a problem that is getting increasingly more insidious. It's the weaponization of media that takes advantage of the inability of the populace to think critically. So as we talk about cultural competence, we're talking about empowering people with the ability to interact with a world that's diverse, right? That has different opinions, different belief systems. W.B. Yeats once said that, well, Yeats didn't actually say it. WikiQuotes said that Yeats said that education is not the filling of a bucket, it's the igniting of a fire. And I think that's probably the basis of the angst. When we enlighten people, we actually challenge the status quo. And sometimes we make beliefs that we've held dear to ourselves and we've built our lives around, we make sometimes those simple beliefs not quite as secure because we're questioning. And that's the only way that we get better is to question. Sometimes we're knocking down barriers that have been erected by societies for purposes. One of the ways we knock down those barriers is our work in inclusion and diversity. You know, Claire Norris has assembled a network of chief diversity officers at all of our institutions and is leading some amazing work in that regard. But it's one product of that is our awarding of a champion of inclusion and diversity for our campuses. And we are so proud to award that this year to Dr. Rudolph Ellis. Rudolph Ellis has done groundbreaking work at Grambling State. He's been there for some time. He's a remarkable person on the individual level, but when you see his work product, it is so inspiring. He has created a safe space on his campus where everybody is somebody. He's done work in educating the campus population on acceptance and inclusion for the LGBTQIA plus community. He has eliminated bullying and is doing incredible work in that very important aspect of inclusion that sometimes gets overlooked. But inclusion for us is about ensuring that all populations belong on our campuses. And sometimes that work is done in a holistic way, and sometimes that work is done in very purposeful, very specific ways. And I'll give you an example of that. Gabe Willis at Southeastern and Kedrick Nicholas at McNeese State called me and said, hey, we want your ideas and your blessing on having a Black Male Summit. In fact, the Black Male Summit was supposed to be associated with our conference that was going to be held on the McNeese campus this year. Of course, because of the pandemic and certainly the destruction that has impacted McNeese, we couldn't do that. I am wearing my McNeese socks today. That's why my feet are itching a bit. Fork them. But the work of those two men and having this idea really inspired me. And so we went to the Oracle when you're inspired, and that's Claire Norris. And we said, hey, we want your ideas on how to do this. And she says, guys, and she does this in such a way that makes you feel very good about yourself, but what she's doing is saying, you're thinking too small. And she says, let's have the Black Male Summit, but let's expand this, and let's create an advisory council that addresses from start to end the barriers and the challenges that are affecting this specific population that we're trying to serve, so we can close some equity gaps and some success gaps, and we can really make a difference. And so on Juneteenth, we are having that Black Male Summit, and you will see an extraordinary keynote speaker that I think that will be surprising to all of you. You'll really enjoy that. But we started just last week the first meeting of the Advisory Council, and the work that is going to emanate from those discussions is going to be truly game-changing and help advance the work of this system in immeasurable ways. Very excited about that work. Thinking about cultural competence in a broad way brings us to something that I think is absolutely essential to that concept, and that's an ethical framework, right? And it's got to be something we embed in our instruction for students, that we've got to incorporate in our own interactions with each other, this ethical complex. We have all seen some troubling stories around sexual misconduct that's occurring on our campuses, and we include this in this idea of cultural competence because it is culturally based. See, we've got a culture that has historically devalued the presence of the woman, or sexualized the presence of the woman, or empowered the presence of the man. And it's led to, in my opinion, this epidemic of sexual violence that occurs on campuses. When you see statistics like 1 in 4 female college students experience sexual violence in some form or another during their time on our campuses, it's totally unacceptable. Now, we've done some very important policy work to advance. We totally revamped our sexual violence policy last June. We added elements to that policy that include when a student withdraws to avoid an investigation, a respondent or a perpetrator, that we're going to withhold their transcript, right, until we can get to the bottom of the investigation. We have put a focus on the victim, responding to the victims, doing the restorative work to help that victim not let this be a life-defining moment, and to give them the resources they need to be successful going forward. This work is going to continue. In fact, at the pre-conference session was done by STAR, who's become one of our partners, one of the leading entities in awareness and response to sexual violence. This work is just getting started. It's something we're going to continue until we get it right and we eliminate the existence of sexual violence on our campus. These initiatives that we have that are purposeful and that are targeted are absolutely important. But every bit as important is our core mission, that foundation of who we are. I got to speak at graduation for the College of Sciences at UL Lafayette last December. And that is an intimidating place to be. My undergrad is in journalism and English. I ain't no scientist, right? But I've got to come up with something to inspire these folks. So I did what anyone who wants to connect with young people today do. I tried to connect quantum physics to the work of Thoreau at Walden. Yeah, stay with me, I promise. There's a point to this. But when Walden said, let us settle ourselves and let us work and wedge our feet downward through the mud and the slush of opinion, of prejudice, of tradition, of delusion, of appearance, that alluvium that covers the globe through Paris and London, to New York and Boston and Concord, through church and state, through poetry and philosophy and religion, till we reach that hard bottom, rocks in place that we can call reality. Reality. That's where we are. We're at that hard bottom where we have to face our reality, where we have to recognize that we've been underinvested in for generations, where we have a state that has sometimes undervalued our work, that we've got to rise up and deliver at a level that we never have before. I'm going to tell you why. McKinsey released some projections on future of work. And we've talked a lot about future of work in the past. But this one really captures the essence of what the future work is going to be. even in the state of Louisiana. You can see that manual labor and lower cognitive skills are going to become increasingly less in demand. And the skills that are going to be in demand are those higher cognitive thinking, those social and emotional skills that we've packaged under cultural competence. The technological literacy, that's what's going to drive the 21st century economy. And listen, sometimes we can step back and be repulsed when our work is characterized as too vocational. But listen, these skill sets, these competencies, these capabilities have been the core of the academy since our very beginning. We just have to figure out how to do it at scale. And when the demands of the economy, when the skill sets that are going to empower people with their own economic self-sufficiency completely align and correlate perfectly with the skills that we try to impart as we develop learners, that's a very powerful place to be. It's about teaching and learning and research. I'm so pleased that Governor Edwards' executive budget is finally starting that reinvestment, the best reinvestment, the most lucrative reinvestment in our work in the last 13 years. It includes the first step in a reinvestment in faculty. And faculty is who we're going to celebrate now. This is the UL Systems Faculty Member of the Year. And I feel like I know Jamie because of her presence on Twitter. If you don't follow the Newman Lab on Twitter, even if you're not a science person, you're missing out. Because it showcases how a faculty member can step out of the classroom and have phenomenal impact on the world around her. She has built her own social network, if you will. She has done some things that a lot of you do outside of the classroom. She served on 20 committees and advisory groups. I don't know why she's not tired. I don't know when she sleeps. She's also developed some ways to bring biomedical conversations to lay people, bringing 37 world-renowned experts into a digitally delivered conversation that's accessible. She's advancing her discipline. She's advancing the art of teaching. She is showcasing the potential impact of an educator. You know, Jamie is so worthy, Dr. Newman is so worthy of this award, and her work over the last 8 years at Louisiana Tech has been game-changing. But a lot of people don't know that she got her PhD in biology at MIT. And it's interesting because I always think of MIT as being a technical type focus, but she got a PhD in biology. And so as I was looking more into their impact or their role that they play in biological sciences, I found an episode where research can come to play, where research can have an impact on the world around us and solve some problems. The Metropolitan Transit Authority in Massachusetts had found a problem, 200 dead crows on Boston area roadways. And the first response was one of panic. This could be avian flu. And so they found a bird pathologist from MIT who came in and did a quick study and said, listen, guys, this isn't an avian flu problem. This is a vehicular impact problem. And they were relieved, but then they were also puzzled as they started to uncover, well, why are we killing so many crows on our roadways? And they noticed paint samples on the beaks and the claws of these birds. And they did the samples and they found something else that was even more troubling. 98% of the crows were hit by trucks, and only 2% of the crows were hit by cars. They go back to MIT and they bring in ornithological behaviorist, and he says, well, you have to understand the crow is an elevated species. They think, they plan, they work together. And so while crows are eating roadkill on the road, they always have a lookout crow up in a tree that can warn them of impending disaster. And to take us even a step further, to be more specific, the Boston crow has no problem saying "ka," but none of them can say truck. Come on. We've been on Zoom for a year and you guys haven't learned to unmute so I can hear your laughter. There we go. My apologies. How about I tell you a real research story? How about I tell you a research story that occurred right here in Louisiana at the New Iberia Research Station that is associated with the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, where the preclinical trials of the Pfizer vaccine, the same vaccine But I got in my arm last week with the new eligibility requirements because obesity, hey, it comes in handy from time to time. The preclinical trials that created a vaccine that is going to enable us to overcome the threats of a global pandemic has its roots in a University of Louisiana system research lab. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And so while the Pfizer research is one tangible aspect of our research work, it's illustrative of the global impact of this system, right? And we talk about that impact on the state of Louisiana in a framework where we pledge to produce the most educated generation in Louisiana's history. But in doing that, we recognize that there are populations that have historically been underserved, and we've got to be very purposeful in closing those equity gaps so that all Louisianans can prosper. We talked about investing in research and driving public-private partnerships that allow us to innovate and generate resources. And we pledge to be good stewards of those resources, right? Being very transparent about our work, but most importantly, recognizing what our most valuable resource is, and that's our people. And we're going to recruit, we're going to retain, we're going to develop the world-class faculty and staff that are the heart and soul of the 9 institutions of the University of Louisiana system. I want to thank you for participating in this conference. More importantly, I want to thank you for the work you do every single day that advances this state. Not for our own gain, but for our future.